we're seeing a pivot. I'm glad that that war came to an end. Congratulations to all involved to make that happen. But of course, I don't think that the nuclear threat is finished, although it's convenient to say so by some.
It has been a week of change, dramatic change in the Middle East following the American bombing of Iran's nuclear installations. Donald Trump said that the war between Iran and Israel was over and there has been a ceasefire, although the fate of Iran's nuclear program long term remains unclear. And of course, there is the continuing Israeli occupation of Gaza and deaths of people trying to get aid. Let's speak to Martin Griffiths, who's a leading British diplomat specialising in conflict mediation. You may remember his work on Yemen. He was also the UN's Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordination from 2021 to 24. Hello to you, Martin Griffiths.
Hello to you, Adam. Good to be with you.
How much do you think has changed in the overall search for peace in the Middle East over the past week since that bombing?
I think the first thing that I've been observing, and I could be wrong, of course, is that we have a very opaque situation in the Israel-US-Iran war and now ceasefire. Not surprising, because negotiations have to be done with discretion. But we're seeing a very different set of statements by both sides. The foreign minister of Iran has recently said that there was severe damage. The IEA has said not really, back in a couple of months. And I think what we're seeing is an attempt by all of those to stop a second round, which would be a good thing, and to pivot to Gaza, thank God for that, to move ahead from an Israeli-US point of view on the Abraham Accords, the deals between Israel and its Gulf neighbors, as well as perhaps getting that ceasefire. And of course, as you know, Qatar and President Trump have talked about picking up momentum on negotiations for the ceasefire, which was completed in February, I think. So I think we're seeing a pivot. I'm glad that that war came to an end. Congratulations to all involved to make that happen. But of course, I don't think that the nuclear threat is finished, although it's convenient to say so by some. And I don't think the idea of a ceasefire in Gaza, which we all must want deeply, is actually quite likely, because the key impediments remain. Saudi Arabia will not sign the Abraham Accords with Israel without a two-state solution. Nor will Hamas. There was a good deal in February. It broke after the first phase, as you remember. So I think real difficulties ahead. And while real difficulties exist, the people who are being killed are the Gazans, including when they are asked to come to get food.
So do you set much store by Donald Trump, who appears to be turning his attention to Gaza and appears to be saying that now is the time for a ceasefire and to bring the Israeli operation to an end at the price, he also appears to be suggesting, of no prosecutions for corruption against Netanyahu?
Yeah, that's an interesting addition to peace negotiations, I must say. I think the UN, and I know you'll ask me in a while about the UN, has a long-time policy in peace agreements not to talk about, in a sense, obliquely in this case, about immunity from prosecution for accountable crimes. But yes, I think it's good that he is back on Gaza. I'm very, very sad that he moved away to Iran when he did, and people in Gaza complained, didn't they, Adam, about lack of attention. The situation gets worse in Gaza every day. The killings go on at great numbers, children first. But the basic maths doesn't still work for a ceasefire in Gaza, much as I wish deeply the contrary. So yes, good attention, but it's got to be also a matter of proper adaptation to the needs of both parties, not just the one.
What do you mean by the basic maths?
The basic maths for me is that, and it has been long the case since almost the beginning of the war, is the future of Gaza, the governance of Gaza, the governance of Palestine, actually. There was an Arab plan. I think the UK and others are now active with France on sort of bringing it back to the table. But if you don't give the people of Gaza a pathway to what I still think is right, which is the two-state solution, they're not going to buy into it. And Hamas, who has said they'll leave, said they'll disarm, thank God for that, will not budge on this. And we've seen it in all the negotiations. And for Israel, of course, their desire is to have a cleaned out Gaza, a big buffer zone. They're cleaning out the West Bank as well. Deportation for those who want it, and I'm sure there'll be many. So it's still conflicting war aims. That's the basic problem. And we all know from peace negotiations that it starts and ends with trying to align war aims.
Now, I know that you said you think it's simplistic to call Hamas a terror organization, but do you feel that the United Nations, in a sense, got too closely aligned with the Palestinian cause in this conflict?
I think it was impossible not to, and I'm pleased about that for the UN, because of course it was the UN which was the cradle, 70, 80 years ago, of the General Assembly resolution calling for a two-state solution and the right of self-determination and return of the Palestinian people. The UN had, therefore, a mandate obligation to deal with that, number one. Number two, and I agree about whether Hamas is terrorist or not. The truth is they've committed terrorist acts, and that's kind of enough, I think. But number two, of course, is the Israeli performance in Gaza. And I, as a former humanitarian chief, had no choice. And of course, I seized that, but to criticize Israel and their backers for what they were doing to the civilians in Gaza and what they're still doing, including through their novel humanitarian aid organization. So I think it was unavoidable. But if I may, actually, Adam, just actually meet you sort of halfway on that. I regret the fact that precisely because of this impasse between the UN and Israel and its backers, that the UN hasn't been able to play the role that it was created for. For example, do you remember the Secretary General Guterres said some months ago that he realized that Israel would never allow the UN to be involved in reconstruction and new governance. We were all involved in Kosovo, in Timor, years gone by to do that. And it can't do it now. And there's no real easy substitute. So I regret it. Israel is a member state of the United Nations. Its actions in many ways are illegal and against the Charter of the United Nations. They're not the only ones. And it's a rift that hasn't helped the world.
I mean, on this question of aid, as you know, the Israeli argument, which has been backed up by the Americans, is that the UN, UNRWA, which was leading on that, had no alternative but to cooperate with Hamas, and that therefore that helped Hamas maintain its grip on a Palestinian population, and effectively was exploiting its own population in that way. Do you think there's any truth in that?
Well, UNRWA, for which I'm a huge fan, by the way, of course, operated in the occupied territories and elsewhere, but in the occupied territories in particular, and particularly in Gaza, necessarily in the context of Hamas elected rule in Gaza, whatever we think about what they did with it. So that's the first thing. And the escorts were, of course, helped by Hamas, the original, before the war and so forth. However, what I feel very strongly about and have done since the early days was that these accusations by Israel against UNRWA staff being involved in the March the 7th appalling tragedy has never been backed up with any evidence that I have seen or any independent investigation. So it's still a claim. It doesn't have evidence. It's never gone to court. And so in that sense, it's a potential slander of UNRWA. So, we need not just for UNRWA, but we need to see independent investigations for what the IDF is doing in Gaza and what Hamas is doing in Gaza. The UN International Criminal Court, as you know, issued indictments for Hamas as well as leaders in Israel. And that absence of any form of normal routine accountability has been exacerbated now by the illegal acts in attacking a member state, Iran in this case, maybe for good or bad reasons, with no comeback, including, in effect, in Britain. where the Western countries have not taken the view that this is a breach of the Charter, even though evidently, I think any lawyer would say it potentially is. So we've gone down on norms and accountability. We seem to have managed to struggle through the adroit diplomacy, I think, by all parties out of the Iran war. And with this careful narrative, hopefully we'll stay out. And then we come back to the sore and the tragic sore that's Gaza.
Martin Griffiths, a pessimistic or depressing outlook perhaps, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you very much.